The rain hammered against the reinforced glass dome of Research Station Kepler 442, each droplet carrying traces of the alien atmosphere that had claimed so many human lives. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the cold surface, watching the crimson lightning streak across the purple sky. 200 years of human presence on this world, and they still felt like unwelcome guests. Another sleepless night, Doc? Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the shadows of the observation deck. His security uniform rumpled from another long shift. The bags under his eyes told the same story as Sarah's. Too much coffee, too little rest, and far too many questions without answers. Sarah turned from the window, her reflection ghosting across the alien landscape beyond. The readings are getting stronger. Marcus, whatever's down there in sublevel 7, is becoming more active. She pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device, showing wave-like patterns in brilliant blue. The energy signatures have increased by 30% in the last month alone. Marcus nodded grimly. Everyone on the station knew about sublevel 7, though few had clearance to access it. The restricted section housed the most classified project in human space, a creature that had been captured during the early days of colonization. The official reports called it a biological anomaly of strategic importance, but the older staff whispered other names. Some called it a demon. Others, more generously, referred to it as a dragon. Command's getting nervous, Marcus said, lowering his voice despite the empty corridor. They're talking about bringing in a full military escort. Apparently, the thing hasn't eaten in 3 weeks, and the containment specialists are worried it might be planning something. Sarah's stomach clenched. She had read the classified files, seen the footage from the creature's capture 2 centuries ago. The being was massive, easily the size of a small spacecraft, with scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Its wings, when fully extended, could span nearly 100 meters. But what disturbed her most were the intelligence readings, off the charts, suggesting a mind far more complex than any Earth animal, possibly even matching human cognitive capacity. What kind of planning could it do? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. It's been chained with quantum restraints since before our great-grandparents were born. The energy fields alone should prevent any significant movement. That's just it, Marcus replied, pulling up his own data tablet. The quantum readings show the restraints are fluctuating. Not failing exactly, but responding to something. The tech teams think the creature might be learning to work with the energy patterns instead of fighting against them. A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the station's perpetual air conditioning. She had specialized in xenobiology specifically because of creatures like this one, beings so far beyond human understanding that they challenged every assumption about life in the universe. But she had never expected to encounter something that might be actively studying its captors. "I want to see it," Sarah said suddenly. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. She had requested access to sublevel 7 dozens of times over her 3 years on the station, always receiving the same bureaucratic rejection. Marcus stared at her. "Sarah, you know that's impossible. Level 7 access requires authorization from 3 different department heads, plus approval from Earth Command. The waiting list alone is 2 years long. The creature is becoming more active, possibly more intelligent in its captivity, and we're just going to sit here, running sensor sweeps?" Sarah's voice rose with frustration. "Marcus, what if it's trying to communicate? What if all this time, we've been holding a sentient being prisoner without even attempting to establish contact?" The security officer was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the alien storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There might be a way. The night shift supervisor in Level 7 is an old friend. He owes me a favor from back when we served together on the outer colonies. But, Sarah, if we get caught..." "We won't," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "One quick visit, just long enough for me to run a basic consciousness assessment. If the creature really is becoming more active, Command needs to know whether they're dealing with an animal or something much more dangerous." Marcus checked his chronometer. Change of shift happens in 40 minutes. The new supervisor doesn't start rounds until midnight. That gives us maybe 20 minutes if we're lucky. He paused, studying Sarah's face in the dim corridor lighting. "You're sure about this? Once we go down there, there's no taking it back. Whatever you see, whatever happens, it becomes part of who you are." Sarah thought about the readings, the energy fluctuations, the growing sense that something momentous was building in the depths of their isolated research station. Humanity had spent 2 centuries on this world, taking what they needed, fighting the native ecosystem, never once considering that they might not be the most intelligent species present. "I'm sure," she said. The service elevator to sub-level 7 was hidden behind a maintenance panel in the station's lower storage area. Marcus's friend had disabled the security sensors for exactly 22 minutes, long enough for them to reach the containment chamber and return, but not long enough for any detailed examination. As they descended, Sarah felt the weight of the station pressing down around them. Level 1 housed the command center and communication arrays. Level 2 contained the laboratories and medical facilities. Levels 3 through 6 held everything from hydroponics to waste processing. But Level 7 was different. Level 7 was carved directly into the bedrock of the planet, surrounded by layers of quantum shielding that could theoretically contain a small nuclear explosion. "Remember," Marcus whispered as the elevator shuddered to a stop, "we observe only. No direct interaction. No attempts at communication, no sudden movements. The restraint system is automated. If it detects any threat to station personnel, it will increase containment force by a factor of 10. That kind of energy surge could kill the creature." The corridor beyond the elevator was unlike anything else in the station. Instead of the standard white polymer walls, everything here was constructed from a dark metallic substance that seemed to drink in their flashlight beams. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows that danced and shifted as they walked. Sarah's scientific instruments began registering immediately. The electromagnetic readings were unlike anything she had ever seen, coherent patterns that suggested complex neural activity, but on a scale that defied conventional understanding. Whatever was in the containment chamber wasn't just alive, it was thinking. They reached the observation window after what felt like an eternity of walking. Marcus input his friend's access code, and blast shutters slowly cycled open to reveal the chamber beyond. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The creature was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Its body stretched across the vast containment chamber, easily 40 meters from snout to tail, covered in scales that shifted between deep black and iridescent purple depending on the angle of observation. 6 limbs ended in claws that could have torn through the station's hull plating, while massive wings lay folded against its back, their membrane surfaces etched with patterns that seemed almost like writing. But it was the creature's head that truly captured Sarah's attention. Elongated and elegant, it reminded her of the dragons from Earth's ancient mythologies, but evolved for intelligence rather than mere predation. Large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge far beyond any earthly animal. And those eyes, Sarah realized with a start, were looking directly at her. The quantum restraints were visible as shimmering fields of energy that wrapped around the creature's limbs and torso, keeping it suspended in the center of the chamber. For 200 years, those restraints had held without fail, containing a being that could theoretically level half the colony if it ever broke free. As Sarah watched, the creature's head tilted slightly, and she could swear she saw recognition in those alien eyes. Not the simple awareness of a trapped animal, but the complex understanding of a mind that knew exactly what was happening to it. "My God," Sarah whispered. "It knows we're here." The creature's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of teeth like crystalline daggers, but instead of a roar or growl, only a soft, almost musical sound emerged. The translator in Sarah's helmet couldn't process the vocalizations, but something about the tone suggested sadness rather than anger. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Time's up. We need to go." But Sarah couldn't move. She stood transfixed by the sight of the most magnificent living being she had ever encountered, held prisoner in the depths of their research station, isolated and alone for longer than any human civilization had existed. The creature's eyes seemed to bore into her soul, and she felt a connection that transcended species barriers. As Marcus practically dragged her back to the elevator, Sarah's mind raced with implications. The creature wasn't just intelligent, it was suffering. 2 centuries of isolation would drive any thinking being to madness, yet the readings suggested it retained full cognitive function. What kind of mental strength would that require? What kind of hope would it need to sustain itself through such an unimaginable ordeal? The elevator ride back to the upper levels passed in silence, but Sarah's thoughts were anything but quiet. She had seen something that would change everything, if only she could convince the authorities to listen. The creature in Sublevel 7 wasn't a weapon or a test subject. It was a person, and for the first time in 200 years, someone had actually seen it for what it truly was. The weeks following Sarah's unauthorized visit to Sublevel 7 passed like a fever dream. She threw herself into research with an intensity that concerned her colleagues, spending 18-hour days poring over every scrap of data related to the creature's capture and containment. The official files painted a picture of humanity's early struggles on Kepler 442, when the colonists had been forced to defend themselves against what they perceived as an aggressive native predator. But the more Sarah dug into the historical records, the more questions arose. "Dr. Chun, you look terrible." Dr. James Wright, the station's chief medical officer, cornered her in the commissary during what passed for her lunch break. "When's the last time you actually slept?" Sarah looked up from her data tablet, realizing she had been staring at the same energy pattern analysis for the past 10 minutes without really seeing it. "Sleep is overrated, James. This research could revolutionize our understanding of xenobiology. This obsession could revolutionize you into a medical emergency," James replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Talk to me, Sarah. What's really going on? Ever since the Thornton expedition returned, you've been acting like you're carrying the weight of the universe." The Thornton expedition. Sarah's stomach clenched at the mention of the recent archaeological survey that had uncovered ruins on the planet's southern continent. Ruins that predated human arrival by thousands of years, featuring architecture and artistic elements that bore striking similarities to certain anatomical features she had observed in Sublevel 7. "James, what do you know about the early colonization period? The real story, not the sanitized version they teach in the history courses." The medical officer frowned, glancing around the nearly empty commissary before leaning forward. "Officially, brave human pioneers taming a hostile alien world, fighting off dangerous native species to establish our rightful place among the stars. Unofficially," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, "my grandfather was one of the original colonists. He used to tell stories when he'd had too much synth alcohol. Stories about a civilization that was already here when we arrived." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of stories?" "Cities of crystal and metal that stretched across entire continents. Technologies that made our best equipment look like stone tools. And guardians, massive, intelligent beings that protected the ancient sites." James's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "According to my grandfather, the first colonists didn't fight off dangerous predators. They fought a war against the last surviving members of an advanced alien civilization." The data tablet slipped from Sarah's fingers, clattering against the metal table. Everything she had suspected, every terrible possibility that had kept her awake for weeks, suddenly crystallized into horrible clarity. The creature in Sublevel 7 wasn't some random alien animal that had been captured for scientific study. It was a prisoner of war. "James, I need you to do something for me. Something that might get us both in serious trouble with command." The medical officer studied her face, noting the desperate intensity in her eyes. "What do you need?" "I need you to help me access the creature's medical records. All of them, dating back to its initial capture." "Sarah, those files are classified beyond my clearance level. Even if I could access them, using my medical credentials for unauthorized research would end my career. What if I told you that our research station might be committing a crime against sentience that violates every principle of interstellar law?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice urgent. What if that creature downstairs isn't a specimen, but a person who's been held prisoner for 2 centuries without trial, without legal representation, without even acknowledgement of their basic rights as a thinking being? James was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers to questions he had never wanted to ask. You're talking about treason, Sarah. If you're wrong, we'll both spend the rest of our lives in a military prison. If you're right. He looked up, meeting her eyes. If you're right, then we're all complicit in something monstrous. I've seen the creature, James. I've looked into its eyes. Whatever else it might be, it's not an animal. It's suffered for 200 years, and it's still sane, still aware, still hoping for something better. That level of psychological resilience suggests a mind far more complex than most humans possess. The medical officer closed his eyes, and Sarah could see him wrestling with a decision that would change everything. When he opened them again, his expression was resolved. The medical archive has a maintenance window every Tuesday night from midnight to 0300. Security sweeps are suspended during that time to prevent interference with the backup systems. That's tomorrow night. Yes, it is. They spent the next 24 hours planning. James would access the medical files using his legitimate credentials, but during a time when the security monitoring systems would be offline. Sarah would analyze the data from her personal workstation, using encrypted channels to avoid detection. If anyone asked, they were collaborating on a routine psychological assessment of long-term captivity effects. Not technically a lie, though far from the complete truth. The medical archive was located in sublevel 3, far enough from the main laboratories to avoid casual observation, but not so isolated as to raise suspicions. James's hands shook slightly as he input his access codes, the weight of 2 centuries of classified information about to be laid bare. Here we go, he whispered, and the holographic displays came to life around them. What they found was worse than either had imagined. The creature had been captured not in a violent confrontation, as the official report suggested, but in what the original medical files described as a diplomatic incident gone wrong. The being had approached the early human settlements under what appeared to be a flag of truce, carrying artifacts that suggested an attempt at peaceful communication. But the colonists, terrified by its size and alien appearance, had interpreted the approach as an attack. The medical records from the first year of captivity made for horrifying reading. The creature had initially refused all food and water, leading researchers to believe it might be attempting suicide rather than submit to study. But gradually, it had begun accepting sustenance, though only enough to survive. Blood samples revealed a complex biochemistry that shared surprising similarities with Earth vertebrates, but with additional organ systems that seemed designed for energy manipulation on a quantum level. Look at this. James pointed to a section of the psychological evaluation records. The creature demonstrates clear signs of language acquisition. Within 6 months of capture, it was responding to spoken human commands. By year 2, it was attempting to communicate using a combination of vocalizations and bioluminescent patterns. Sarah scrolled through decades of observations, watching the slow degradation of hope in the clinical notes. The creature's attempts at communication became less frequent as the years passed, its responses to stimuli more mechanical. But throughout it all, the intelligence indicators remained consistently high. It never gave up learning, Sarah realized. Even after 50 years, even after 100, it was still trying to understand us. Still hoping we might eventually understand it. They reached the most recent files, and Sarah's blood ran cold. The past 6 months showed a dramatic change in the creature's behavior. The being that had spent 2 centuries in resigned compliance was becoming active again, its energy readings spiking in patterns that the medical staff couldn't interpret. What changed? James asked, studying the same data. What could have triggered this kind of behavioral shift after so many decades of stability? Sarah thought about her visit to Sublevel 7, the way the creature's eyes had tracked her movements, the almost musical sounds it had made. Recognition, she said softly. It's been alone for 200 years, and for the first time, someone looked at it and saw a person instead of a thing. You think it knows you were there? I think it's been waiting for someone to see it for what it really is. And now that it knows, there's at least one human who recognizes its intelligence. Sarah paused, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. James, what if the energy fluctuations aren't random? What if they're deliberate? What if it's trying to tell us something? They spent the remaining hours of the maintenance window downloading and encrypting every piece of data they could access. By the time the security systems came back online, they possessed the most complete picture of the creature's captivity that any human had seen since the original research team. As they prepared to leave the archive, James grabbed Sarah's arm. What happens now? Even if everything we suspect is true, even if that creature is a sentient being who's been wrongly imprisoned, what can we do about it? We're just two researchers on a remote station. Command would never listen to us. Sarah looked at the encrypted data files on her personal device, each one representing years of suffering endured by a being whose only crime had been approaching humans with an offer of peace. We do what every human should do when faced with an injustice this massive, she said. We find a way to make it right. The walk back to their quarters felt like a journey across a vast moral landscape. Everything they thought they knew about their mission, their research, their very presence on Kepler 442 had been fundamentally altered. They were no longer scientists studying an alien specimen. They were witnesses to what might be the greatest crime in human history. And somewhere in the depths of Sublevel 7, a prisoner who had waited 2 centuries for justice was finally beginning to hope that someone might actually care enough to provide it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's linguistics expert, approached Sarah 3 days after the archive infiltration with a puzzled expression and a data pad full of incomprehensible symbols. Sarah, I need your xenobiology expertise, Elena said, sliding into the seat across from her in the research lab. I've been analyzing some acoustic patterns that Marcus Rodriguez recorded near the lower maintenance areas. The computer flagged them as potential communication attempts, but they don't match any known language patterns. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Marcus had mentioned nothing about recordings, but she suspected where those maintenance area sounds might have originated. What kind of patterns are we talking about? Elena activated her display, filling the air between them with a 3-dimensional acoustic map. Complex tonal variations with mathematical precision. Look at these frequency intervals. They're based on prime number sequences, but modified in ways that suggest intentional information encoding. Sarah, I think we might have discovered the first evidence of active alien communication on Kepler 442. Staring at the patterns, Sarah realized she was looking at something far more significant than Elena suspected. The acoustic signatures matched perfectly with the vocalizations she had heard during her visit to Sublevel 7. The creature wasn't just making sounds, it was speaking. It had been trying to communicate for decades, possibly centuries, and no one had bothered to listen. Elena, I need to show you something. But first, I need your word that what I'm about to share stays between us until we can figure out the right way to handle it. The linguist studied Sarah's face, noting the tension lines that had appeared over the past weeks. This is about more than random acoustic anomalies, isn't it? Much more. Sarah spent the next hour explaining everything. The unauthorized visit to Sublevel 7, the medical records, the growing evidence that humanity had been holding a sentient prisoner for 2 centuries. Elena listened without interruption, her expression shifting from skepticism to horror as the full scope of the situation became clear. We need more people, Elena said finally. If we're going to do anything meaningful, we can't handle this alone. The creature has been isolated for 200 years. Any attempt at meaningful communication will require a team of specialists. Who can we trust? Marcus is already involved. Dr. Wright has shown he's willing to bend rules for the right cause. What about Dr. Okafor in the engineering section? If we need to access Sublevel 7 legitimately, we'll need someone who understands the containment systems. Dr. Amara Okafor was a brilliant engineer whose great-grandmother had been part of the original colonization effort. Unlike most of the current staff, she possessed detailed knowledge of the older systems that kept the research station operational. More importantly, She had a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions about official policies. They approached her during the evening shift, when the administrative staff had retired and the atmosphere felt more conducive to sensitive conversations. Okafor listened to their presentation with the systematic attention of someone accustomed to analyzing complex technical problems. The quantum restraint system was designed to be inescapable, she said when they finished. But it was also designed 2 centuries ago, using technologies that we've significantly advanced since then. If the creature has been studying the containment fields for decades, it might know more about how they work than we do. Sarah leaned forward. What do you mean? The original designers assumed they were dealing with a powerful, but essentially primitive intelligence. They built the restraints to contain something that would fight against them through brute force. But what if the creature has spent 200 years learning to work with the quantum fields instead of against them? What if it's been developing a symbiotic relationship with its own prison? The implications were staggering. If the creature could manipulate the quantum fields that held it, then its recent behavioral changes might not be random agitation. They might be carefully planned preparations for something unprecedented. We need to establish communication, Elena said. Real communication, not the one-sided observational studies that have been conducted for 2 centuries. If this being is truly sentient, if it's been wrongfully imprisoned, then we owe it the chance to tell its own story. And if it's been planning an escape? Marcus asked, voicing the fear that none of them wanted to acknowledge. Then we need to know what it intends to do with its freedom, Okafor replied. A being with that level of intelligence, held prisoner for 2 centuries, has every right to be angry. But anger isn't necessarily the same thing as evil. We won't know its intentions until we actually ask. They spent the next week developing a plan. Elena would create a basic communication protocol using mathematical and acoustic principles that should be comprehensible to any intelligent being. Okafor would find a way to access Sublevel 7 that wouldn't trigger security protocols. James would monitor the creature's biological responses to ensure that their contact attempts weren't causing harmful stress. Sarah would serve as the primary contact specialist, drawing on her xenobiology expertise to interpret behavioral cues. Marcus, with his security clearance, would provide early warning if command became suspicious of their activities. The plan required them to access Sublevel 7 during a maintenance window, but this time through official channels. Okafor submitted a routine engineering inspection request, citing concerns about quantum field fluctuations that might compromise station safety. It was technically accurate. The containment system had been showing unusual readings, but the real purpose was to give the team legitimate access to the creature. The night before their planned contact attempt, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the station's corridors, eventually making her way to the observation deck, where she had first spoken with Marcus weeks earlier. The alien storm had passed, leaving behind a clear view of the binary star system that hung in the purple sky. Nervous, James appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Terrified, Sarah admitted. What if we're wrong? What if the creature really is just an animal, and we're projecting human consciousness onto something that doesn't possess it? And what if we're right? James countered. What if we're about to become the first humans in 200 years to actually treat another intelligent species with dignity? The implications either way are enormous. If we're wrong, we've compromised station security and violated multiple regulations for nothing. If we're right, then we have a chance to correct one of the greatest injustices in human history. The maintenance inspection was scheduled for 0800 hours, during the skeleton crew shift when most of the station personnel would be off duty. Okafor's team had already begun their routine examination of the quantum containment systems, providing perfect cover for the communication attempt. As they descended to Sublevel 7, each member of the team carried equipment that served dual purposes. Elena's acoustic analysis gear could record and play back the complex tonal patterns that might constitute the creature's language. James's medical sensors would monitor both their vital signs and the creature's biological responses. Sarah's xenobiology scanner could detect emotional and stress indicators that might help them understand the being's psychological state. The containment chamber looked exactly as Sarah remembered, but this time she saw details that had escaped her notice during the initial unauthorized visit. The walls showed evidence of careful attention from the creature, areas where its claws had traced complex geometric patterns over the decades, almost like a form of artistic expression or mathematical notation. Elena, are you seeing this? Sarah pointed to the wall markings. The linguist raised her recording equipment, capturing detailed images of the carved patterns. These aren't random scratches. This is systematic notation of some kind. Look at the mathematical relationships between the different symbol groups. The creature itself appeared to be sleeping when they arrived, its massive form suspended in the center of the chamber by the quantum restraints. But as Elena began broadcasting her carefully crafted communication sequence, a series of prime number sequences modulated with harmonic variations, the being's eyes opened. This time, Sarah was prepared for the intelligence she saw there. The creature's gaze swept across each member of the team, lingering on their equipment, clearly recognizing that something different was happening. Elena's communication sequence completed, and the chamber fell silent. For long moments, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the creature's throat began to vibrate, producing a complex series of tones that made their translation equipment light up with activity. "It's responding," Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The mathematical structure matches our opening sequence, but with variations that suggest elaboration rather than simple repetition. Sarah, this is actual language." The creature continued vocalizing, its patterns becoming more complex and emotionally nuanced. The translation computer struggled to process the alien syntax, but gradually, fragments of meaning began to emerge on their displays. Hope, loneliness, gratitude, pain, and underneath it all, something that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears despite her scientific objectivity. The word that appeared over and over again in the translation attempts was waiting. For 200 years, this magnificent being had been waiting for someone to listen. The translation breakthrough came during their third communication session. Elena had been working around the clock to refine the linguistic algorithms, cross-referencing the creature's vocalizations with the mathematical patterns carved into the containment chamber walls. When the computer finally achieved stable translation protocols, the first complete message they received changed everything. "I am Zephyria of the deep currents, guardian of the fourth sanctuary, keeper of the eternal harmonics. I have waited 217 rotations of the near star for someone to hear my words. Why have you come now, when the final convergence approaches?" The team sat in stunned silence as Elena played back the translation. The creature, Zephyria, had a name, a title, a sense of time that matched human records with terrifying precision. And there was something in that final question that filled Sarah with dread. "Final convergence," Sarah repeated. "Elena, ask her what she means by that." Elena spoke into her translation device, and the acoustic patterns flowed into the containment chamber. Zephyria's response was immediate and complex, requiring several minutes for the computer to process. The deep currents flow through all space, connecting every world that bears life. My people built the sanctuaries to channel these currents, to prevent the chaos that comes when worlds die without guidance. Your people severed the connections when you took this world. Now, the fourth sanctuary fails, and the currents grow wild. Soon they will tear through the barriers between dimensions, consuming not just this world, but every world within 12 light years. Dr. Okafor's face had gone pale. She's talking about the quantum anomalies we've been detecting, the energy fluctuations that have been increasing over the past several months. Ask her about the sanctuaries, Sarah said urgently. Ask her what needs to be done to prevent this convergence. The conversation that followed stretched across hours, with Zephyria explaining concepts that challenged the fundamental assumptions of human physics. Her people, the ethereal dominion, had been spacefaring for millions of years before humanity had developed agriculture. They didn't travel between stars and ships. They moved through what they called the deep currents, quantum pathways that connected all life-bearing worlds in a vast network of controlled energy. The sanctuaries were not just buildings or technological installations. They were living systems that required conscious guidance from beings capable of quantum consciousness, the ability to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers. Zephyria's people possessed this capability naturally, allowing them to serve as guardians for worlds throughout the galaxy. When your people arrived, Zephyria explained through the translation system, they could not perceive the sanctuaries. To human senses, they appeared to be empty ruins. But when you began mining the crystalline formations that housed the quantum processors, you disrupted the connection between this world and the deep currents. The crystal mines, James breathed. Our entire industrial operation here is built around harvesting quantum crystals. We've been strip mining their infrastructure for 2 centuries. Zephyria's next words confirmed their worst fears. I was sent to your settlements to explain the danger, to offer cooperation in finding alternative resources that would not threaten the sanctuary network. But your people saw only a dangerous predator and responded with violence. I allowed myself to be captured rather than fight back, hoping that eventually someone would listen. 200 years, Sarah whispered. She's been trying to warn us for 200 years. Elena worked frantically to maintain the communication flow as Zephyria continued her explanation. The quantum restraints that held her weren't just preventing her escape. They were blocking her ability to access the deep currents and maintain the 4th sanctuary. Every day she remained imprisoned, the dimensional barriers became weaker. How long do we have? Okafor asked. The translation took several minutes to process. When it completed, the display showed a single, terrifying number, 17 days. What happens in 17 days? The barriers collapse completely. The uncontrolled quantum energy will cascade through the deep current network, destroying the dimensional stability of every connected world. Your term would be supernova, but affecting entire star systems simultaneously. The magnitude of the catastrophe they faced was beyond comprehension. Billions of lives on dozens of worlds, all because humanity had imprisoned the one being capable of preventing it. What do you need? Sarah asked. What has to happen to fix this? Zephyria's response was complex, involving quantum harmonics and dimensional mathematics that their translation system could barely parse. But the essential points were clear. She needed to be freed from the quantum restraints, and she needed access to the 4th sanctuary's core systems, which were located beneath the planet's surface in an area that humans had been strip mining for decades. There's a problem, Marcus said grimly. Even if we can convince Command to release her, the sanctuary core is in Sector 7 of the primary mining operation. That area is controlled by Hegemony Corporation security forces. They're not going to shut down a trillion-credit operation based on the word of a creature they consider to be a dangerous alien predator. Then, we don't ask for their permission, Sarah said. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. 6 months ago, she had been a by-the-book researcher who had never violated so much as a minor regulation. Now, she was contemplating actions that bordered on treason. Sarah, you're talking about breaking into the most secure facility on the planet, James said. The mining operation has its own defense grid, military-grade security, and a garrison of corporate troops. We're scientists, not commandos. Then, we find another way. Sarah turned back to the containment chamber, where Zephyria waited with the infinite patience of a being who had already endured centuries of imprisonment. Zephyria, is there anything else you can do from here? Any way to at least delay the convergence while we figure out how to reach this sanctuary core? The creature's response was thoughtful and measured. The restraint system prevents me from accessing the deep currents directly, but it does not block all quantum resonance. If the harmonics could be modified to create a sympathetic vibration, I might be able to extend the dimensional barriers temporarily. But this would require precise alterations to the containment field generators. Okafor stepped forward. I can modify the restraint system. The original designers built in adjustment protocols for containing different types of quantum entities. If Zephyria can provide the exact harmonic frequencies needed, I can reprogram the field generators to produce sympathetic resonance instead of pure containment. How much time would that buy us? Elena asked. Perhaps 30 days. Enough time to plan a proper approach to the sanctuary core. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was hope. For the first time since learning about the convergence, Sarah felt like they might actually be able to prevent a catastrophe that would make the destruction of Earth's old civilization look like a minor accident. But as they prepared to implement Zephyria's modifications to the containment system, Marcus received an urgent communication from the station's command center. His face went pale as he read the message. "We have a problem," he said. "Command has detected unauthorized access to Sublevel 7. They're sending a full security team to investigate, and they're bringing equipment designed to increase containment field strength by a factor of 20. Sarah felt her heart sink. If Command strengthened the restraints before they could implement Zephyria's harmonic modifications, any chance of preventing the convergence would be lost. They had perhaps an hour before the security team arrived, and the modifications would take at least 3 hours to complete properly. "We need more time," she said desperately. Zephyria's voice filled the chamber, and this time the translation came through with crystalline clarity. "There is another way, but it will require great trust and greater courage. What do you need? Free me from the restraints completely. Let me access the deep currents long enough to stabilize the fourth sanctuary temporarily. I give you my word as a guardian that I will return to captivity voluntarily once the immediate crisis is averted." The request hit the team like a physical blow. Freya being capable of leveling half the colony, based entirely on her promise to return? Trust the word of an alien intelligence that humanity had held prisoner for 2 centuries? "If we're wrong about her," James said quietly, "everyone on this planet dies anyway." "If we're right," Sarah replied, "everyone in 12 star systems' lives." She looked at each member of her team, seeing the same desperate calculation in their eyes. They had come too far, learned too much to turn back now. Sometimes, the only way to prove your faith in justice was to risk everything for it. "Okafor, can you disable the restraints from here?" The engineer nodded grimly. "It will take approximately 10 minutes to cycle through the shutdown sequence. Once I start, there's no turning back." Sarah approached the containment chamber's control panel, her hand hovering over the authorization interface. In a few moments, she would either save multiple star systems or be responsible for the greatest catastrophe in human history. "Zephyria," she called out to the waiting creature, "give us your word. Promise us that you will return willingly to these restraints once the sanctuary is stabilized." The response came without hesitation. "I swear by the eternal harmonics, by the memory of my people, and by the hope of lasting peace between our species, that I will submit to whatever containment you deem necessary once the immediate threat is resolved." Sarah input her authorization code, and the quantum restraints began their shutdown sequence. For the first time in 217 years, Zephyria of the deep currents was about to be free. The moment the quantum restraints collapsed, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Zephyria's massive form slowly descended to the chamber floor, her wings unfurling for the first time in over 2 centuries. The membrane surfaces that Sarah had glimpsed earlier revealed themselves to be covered in intricate patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent energy, creating a light show of impossible beauty. But it was the change in the creature herself that truly amazed the watching humans. Where before Zephyria had seemed diminished by her captivity, now she radiated a presence that filled the entire chamber. This was what she had been before her imprisonment. Not just a magnificent animal, but a being of profound intelligence and spiritual depth. "The pain," Zephyria spoke, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber walls. "After so many years, I had forgotten what it felt like to touch the deep currents." Energy patterns began flowing around her, visible as streams of light that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sarah's instruments went wild, registering quantum effects that shouldn't have been possible according to human physics. "Zephyria," Elena called out urgently. "The security team will be here soon." How long do you need to stabilize the sanctuary? The damage is extensive, the Guardian replied, her consciousness clearly expanding beyond the confines of the chamber. 2 centuries of severed connections have allowed chaos to build throughout the network. To repair it properly will require. She paused, and her bioluminescent patterns shifted to configurations that hurt to look at directly. It will require a sacrifice I am not certain I can make. What kind of sacrifice? To restore the full connection, I must merge permanently with the fourth sanctuary's core systems. I will become the living heart of the quantum network for this sector, maintaining the deep currents until another Guardian can be born and trained to replace me. This could take millennia. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Zephyria was offering to trade one form of captivity for another, even more permanent one. After 2 centuries of imprisonment, she would voluntarily accept an isolation that could last for thousands of years. There has to be another way, Sarah said. Some alternative that doesn't require you to sacrifice your freedom. Freedom, Zephyria mused, her great head turning to regard the human team. An interesting concept. I have been free for less than one of your hours, yet already I understand something about your species that 2 centuries of observation could not teach me. What do you understand? You freed me not because you had proof of my innocence, but because you chose to trust in justice over safety. This is not the action of the species that captured me 200 years ago. You have evolved, not just technologically, but morally. Through the station's communication systems, they could hear the approaching security team. Marcus's radio crackled with urgent transmissions as command tried to understand what was happening in Sublevel 7. Zephyria, we need to go, Okafor said. If you're going to access the sanctuary core, it has to be now. But instead of moving toward the chamber's exit, Zephyria settled more comfortably on the chamber floor, her luminescent patterns shifting to what almost looked like a smile. No, she said simply. There's a third option, one that will require far more trust than simply freeing me from my restraints. What option? You must help me teach your people to become guardians themselves. The suggestion was so unexpected that for a moment, none of them could respond. Elena was the first to find her voice. Is that even possible? You said guardian abilities require quantum consciousness that humans don't naturally possess. True quantum consciousness, yes. But the preliminary skills can be learned by any sufficiently intelligent species. Your people have already developed many of the necessary technologies. What you lack is understanding of how to integrate them with biological consciousness. Sarah felt a thrill of possibility. You're talking about a partnership. Humans and your people working together to maintain the sanctuary network. More than a partnership. A true joining of our species' capabilities. Your people's adaptability and technological innovation, combined with our understanding of the deep currents, could create something neither species could achieve alone. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. In minutes, the security team would arrive to find the containment chamber breached and a supposedly dangerous alien creature free from the restraints that had held her for 2 centuries. Zephyria, they're going to try to force you back into the restraints, Marcus warned. These people don't understand what you really are. To them, you're just a threat to be contained. Then, you must help them understand, Zephyria replied. But not through words alone. Through demonstration. The Guardian's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a new configuration, and suddenly, Sarah felt something impossible happening. Her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her physical body, touching something vast and interconnected that existed parallel to normal space. For just a moment, she experienced the deep currents as Zephyria did, a living network that connected every intelligent being in the galaxy. The sensation lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Sarah understood now what humanity had been missing, what they could become if they were willing to accept genuine partnership with an alien intelligence. Show the others, she said. One by one, Zephyria touched the minds of the team members, giving them each a brief glimpse of the interconnected universe that existed beyond human perception. Elena experienced the mathematical beauty of the quantum harmonics. James felt the life-sustaining energy that flowed between worlds. Okafor saw the technological marvels that became possible when consciousness and engineering worked in perfect harmony. Marcus experienced the profound peace that came from understanding humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. When the security team burst into the containment chamber, weapons raised and ready for combat, they found something none of them had expected. The supposedly dangerous alien predator was surrounded by the research team, all of whom appear to be in some kind of meditative trance. But instead of showing signs of mental domination or coercion, their faces radiated a peace and understanding that was unmistakable. "Stand down," Sarah called out, her voice carrying an authority that stopped the security team in their tracks. "This being is not our enemy. She's our salvation." What followed was the most remarkable first contact event in human history. Instead of meeting an alien species through warfare or tense diplomatic negotiations, humanity encountered the ethereal dominion through an act of compassion. Sarah's simple kindness, her willingness to see intelligence rather than threat, had opened the door to a relationship that would transform both species. The negotiations took months. Command had to be convinced, then Earth government, then the entire colonial administration. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. The quantum anomalies that had been threatening the entire star system began stabilizing as Zephyria worked with human engineers to create hybrid technology that could maintain the sanctuary network. More importantly, other guardians began arriving. Beings who had thought their people extinct, who had spent centuries wandering the deep currents in isolation, suddenly detected the renewed activity of the fourth sanctuary. They came to investigate and found something unprecedented, a young species that had not only recognized their mistake, but was actively working to correct it. The transformation of Research Station Kepler 442 into the first Interspecies Cooperation Center was completed 18 months after Sarah's unauthorized visit to Sublevel 7. The facility now housed the largest collection of human ethereal research teams in known space, working on projects that range from improved quantum communication to the exploration of previously unknown galaxies through the deep current network. Sarah often found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this transformation. A bowl of soup, the simple act of kindness that had started it all. She had brought Zephyria food during their second communication session, not because it was required by any protocol, but because it felt like the right thing to do for a being who had been alone for so long. That bowl of soup had led to trust, trust had led to communication, and communication had opened the door to a future neither species could have imagined alone. Standing in the observation deck of the transformed station, watching human children play alongside young ethereals in the community gardens that now flourished throughout the facility, Sarah smiled. Sometimes the most profound changes in the universe began with the simplest acts of humanity. The chains that had held Zephyria for 2 centuries hadn't just faded. They had been transformed into bridges connecting 2 civilizations across the vast darkness of space. And at the heart of it all was the truth that Sarah had recognized in a pair of ancient, intelligent eyes. That dignity, respect, and compassion were the universal constants that could unite any thinking beings, no matter how different they might appear. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the discovery that kindness could travel faster than light and transcend any barrier that fear might construct. In the end, it hadn't been human technology or military might that had saved multiple star systems from destruction. It had been a simple recognition that every conscious being, regardless of species, deserved to be seen as more than just a thing to be studied or contained. And in learning to see Zephyria as she truly was, humanity had discovered something equally important about themselves. They were capable of growing beyond their fears and becoming worthy partners in the cosmic community of intelligent life. The stars shone brighter now, connected by currents of energy and understanding that flowed between worlds like rivers of liquid starlight. And somewhere in the vast network of the deep currents, two species that had once been enemies now work together as guardians, ensuring that the light of consciousness would continue to burn throughout the galaxy for eons to come.